Morning again. So yesterday we had a couple of issues with the TMS machine. I was up until 1:30 with my colleagues back in England. We've done a bit of a reset on it this morning, and it all appears to be working again, which is good. So there's no issues, and I will hopefully be leaving you all very happy with a new TMS machine where you can do plenty of research with. So yeah, this morning I'll do a bit of a recap on the TMS machine because there was a couple of you weren't here yesterday morning. So I'll tell you kind of what it does basically, how we can get a motor, we can get an MEP spike, because every time you administer RTMS, you do it at a percentage of someone's motor threshold. So in order to do that, you need to first get their motor threshold. So I'll show you how to do that this morning, and then we can use me as a bit of a subject again, and I'll let one of you use the coil over my motor Cortex so we can get a finger twitch. I'll show you how to set up the EMG and what you need to be looking for. So the first thing we need to do there is we'll come out of this, and if we go into patient list on here, so when you turn on the software, this is what you're presented with. So this is your first screen. So what you want to do is we want to create a new patient. So whoever your, I'll move this back so the view's a little bit better. So whoever your subject may be, you can go into add patient there, and you can pop in their name there, and you can also give them an ID number. You can have the software either generate them their own ID number there, or you can click in there and you can type in whatever number you want to give them. So once all those are added, you can see there, because we've never done anything, there's no history of stimulation with this subject here, so we don't have anything in there. So from there, we go into select patient, and we're taken into this screen. So you can see here, we've got the EMG box turned on, but there's nothing connected to it. So at the moment, we're just getting a trace of, which is noise. So what we do there is we would then hook them up to the EMG. So I'll do that using the starter kit. These days. Okay. It's just the same one I was using yesterday. First thing to do is put on the patient grounding strap. You always want to do this around a bony protrusion. So in the wrist is a good place to do it because you've got that. Everyone has that nice kind of bone on top of the wrist. Another one you can do is the ankle there because you've got quite prominent bones in the ankle as well. So this goes on, and you want this strap to be nice and tight, so you're getting quite a good kind of constant connection. And if you have any questions whilst I'm doing this, if there's anything kind of pops up that you've got any questions on, don't hesitate to ask. Just let me know. So patient grounding strap goes on there. Nice thing with this is that that's just a press stud. So in between testing, you don't have to take loads of stuff off. You can leave the patient grounding strap on if you like. So patient grounding strap goes in there, and then on the EMG head box in the middle there, you've got an inlet which says PG, which stands for patient ground. So that goes in the middle. The next thing to do is to connect your electrodes. Now, electrodes come in kind of two different ways. The ones we supply in the starter kit have nice kind of single cables, and then they split into your red and your blue cathode and anode at the end there. But you do also get them, which are two cables all the way through. So your two cables, if you do have, you go in the top there in channel 1, So obviously red to red and black to black. If you've just got the single cable, that can plug straight in there. So you can see there when I've plugged that in, if we can see on the screen there, I'll double tap there. We've got a whole load of noise there. So that's just because I've got the electrodes, I'm kind of moving them around. So we're seeing a lot of noise. When I put the single-use electrodes on my skin and I relax my hand, we'll then see that noise will go down a long way. So usually when you're preparing the skin to do EMG, what you'd want to do is just lightly, very lightly abrade the surface and then clean it with an alcohol wipe. That's just to get off any dead skin and make sure you've got a very, very clean connection. So you've got as few artifacts as possible. For the case of a demonstration, no, we don't need to go into that much skin prep. So we can just pop these straight on. These are pre-gelled as well, so you don't need to worry. The ones in your starter kit are, you don't need to worry about kind of gelling the skin of the electrode at all. Now when you put in electrodes on, the two places you want to put them is over the kind of the main belly of the muscle there, because that's where the most electronic signal is. And so you want one electrode on there, and you want the other one over the origin of the muscle. So in this muscle, which is the FDI, the origin's down here in the knuckle of the finger there. Now a general rule of thumb, it's not absolutely vital, but a general rule of thumb in EMG is to have your black electrode lead going into the belly of the muscle. If you were to get that the wrong way around, all you'd see there is your trace would just flip around. So you wouldn't get a different reading. Your trace would just be the other way around. So it's not absolutely vital that you do get them that way. So when I plug this red in there, you'll be able to see what's going on with me on there. Okay, so now I relax my hand. So you can see there we've got a nice smooth trace. Now every time I move my index finger, we're going to get a nice spike on that trace there. So that's me moving my index finger, and we can see there we've got the results of the EMG coming up on the screen. The top one, so this screen is showing the same thing. It's just the top one is showing a time frame of 20 seconds, and the bottom one is showing a time frame of 100 milliseconds. So all that's doing, the top one is just zoomed out a long way in terms of the time scale it's taken across. So if we double tap back on there, and take us back to our main screen. Now what we can do there is we can start to set up how to get an MEP, how to evoke. So MEP is motor evoke potential. So because we are stimulating the motor cortex, we are evoking, we're making we're depolarizing the neurons. So this is kind of the technical side of TMS. You're depolarizing the neurons, which makes them more likely to fire. So when you send them an electrical current, they go, okay, and it opens that motor pathway and then elicits a response in my index finger, which, because this muscle here has been told to fire by the TMS pulse. So what we want to do, so I'm now going to have my back to you, unfortunately. We want to take the coil there. Now, when we're trying to find the motor cortex, a good way to do it is if you were to take your thumb and index finger and put them over the head that way. So if I've got a subject sat in the chair, I take my fingers like that over the head. Now the motor strip runs up from the ears and across the top of the head for each side. So a good way to do it is to take your fingers like that over the head, and you're going to get the motor strip there. So you want the crosshairs on the bottom of the coil. That there is the coil hotspot. So you want that crosshair to be over the area on the head that you're stimulating. So if I just sit down on here. So the coil can be used in two locations. You've got your winding there. So you can see as I'm moving this, we've got I don't know how well you can see that. But we've got the grey bar moving on there, and then we've got the red button there. Now, because we've not got this enabled at the moment, when you do that, that's going to tell the coil to stimulate. You can also stimulate from here. So when I press, so at the moment this is like, it's like a safety, but when I press enable there, that means the coil is now live. So if I was to press that red button now, we would elicit a pulse. So every time, it's just good practice that when you're not stimulating, you've got disable turned on there, because it just means no one can accidentally send a magnetic pulse. So you can stimulate from two places now. We can either send a single stimulation from the screen itself, or we can send one from there. So that's a pulse just being sent from there. We can also send one from here. So when you're using like the brain sight chair and you've got the coil held still, it then means you can leave your subject kind of where they are. You can come back to the screen and you can analyze all your data at the same time by just kind of pressing single stim. You can also use these arrows here to change the power of the stimulator. So there, what's happening there. And again, like I said yesterday, it's a resistive touch screen, so you do have to press it quite hard to make the numbers change. Okay, so what we want to look for is how we measure someone's resting motor threshold. Is we want to elicit a pulse in the motor cortex for the right muscle, and when we're doing so, the number there that's highlighted, now it's going to be very small, so I do apologize, but the number there that's highlighted at the moment says 2058. What we want to do is we want to get we want to give the subject 10 pulses, and we want 7 out of 10 or 10 out of 10 of those pulses to be between 700 and 1,500. When we've got 7 out of 10 of those pulses in that range, we can then start to turn the coil down, and you want to keep turning down until we're seeing 5 out of 10 pulses. So keep sending pulses with the coil, and then 5 out of 10 of those pulses, we want that to be 50. Now, 50 on there, you're not going to see, and you're not going to see a finger twitch at 50 pulses. So that is all going to come from the data in the screen. Once you've got 5 out of 10 at 50, you then hit set RMT. So at the moment, that's on 78%, which is it's very high for a resting motor threshold. But you set RMT there. So for example, so that one's set there. So we can save all that, disable there, and then we can go back to our patient list. So say for example, we just did that. Patient list there, you can see we've done motor evoked potential, we've found the resting motor threshold, and we've got an intensity of 78%. So when we then go back in and design our RTMS protocols, we then know that their resting motor threshold is 78%. So we can stimulate at 120% of that, or 50% of that, or whatever your protocol is. So we'll go back in, and I'll actually show you what we want to do. So again, you can see we've gone back in there, and the coil, because we've taken out the coils in the safe mode. So I'm going to click on enable there. At the moment we're on 30%, which is probably going to be too low to find a response. So I'll turn it up quite high so it's easier. Okay, one thing to consider, no phones or anything. It's always quite hard work to do on yourself. So every time you stimulate in the cortex as well, you want to stimulate on the opposite side of the brain, because left hemisphere controls right hand side of the body and right hemisphere controls left hand side of the body. So when you're stimulating, if you watch this hand here, if I'm in the right place, we should see quite a nice muscle twitch. Okay, so you see my middle finger move there? And we should be getting on the screen behind me as well, we should be getting some readings every time we're getting a twitch there. So what we want to do is we want to do 10 pulses from the coil, and we want 7 out of those 10 pulses to read either 700 to 1500. When we've got 7 out of 10 there, we then wind the coil down and then once we take the coil down a bit further, we want to keep going until that twitch is not noticeable in the hand, but the number on the trace there is down to 50 millivolts. So it's a small amount that you won't see a twitch. You've got to rely on the, like I say, you've got to rely on the data there. So once that's sorted, like I say, you can then stimulate a percentage of that kind of resting motor threshold. So again, if we've got a subject that wants to come up and control the coil and try and find my resting motor threshold. Anyone? I don't mind being poked and prodded. You fancy it? Okay, so I'll take a seat. So you've got the coil there. So what you're looking for is that peak-to-peak value when we want 7 out of 10 to be between 700 and 1500 there. When we've done 7 out of 10 that are between those two values, you're going to take the winding down on the coil, which is that one there, yeah. So you're going to take the power down until we're seeing 5 out of 10 are reading kind of around 50.
Don't quite get it.
Hey?
Don't quite get it.
Okay, so I'll talk you through it whilst you're doing it. So that's enabled at the moment,
Okay.
but what we should have done there is while we were talking, we should have pressed disable so you can't accidentally kind of shoot me in the eye or anything.
Right.
Okay, so enable there, and then that crosshair there, that's the hot spot of the coil. So you want that crosshair to be over my kind of motor cortex there. So if you take you can take your fingers like that, kind of over my ears, and that's where my motor strip is.
Like this?
Yeah, so you're in a straight line. Yeah, so when you want to stimulate the motor cortex, you want to be at 45 degrees from the midline of the brain. So because you want to stimulate perpendicular to the gyrus in the brain. So if you bring the tail of the coil back, so you want the coil to be sat on my head like that. That's it, yeah. So you want the coil to be nice and flat as well. So that feels as though it's in about the right place there. So if you stand behind me and look at the screen.
Like this?
Yeah.
So, should I click?
Yeah. Okay. There's nothing there. So you just want to move the coil around slightly until we start to see a response in there.
Maybe EMG, right?
Yeah. Okay, so nothing there. So just I'll bring this closer a little bit as well so we can. Should be a bit easy. It gives you a bit more of that to play with there. So that's it. Bring it round a bit. So that's about where it needs to be there.
Like this?
Yeah. Okay, that was excellent there. So if you leave the coil right there.
Yeah.
Now, and when you fire, watch my index finger when you fire. Oh, we missed it there, unfortunately. Right. Keep going. Turn the stimulator up a little bit. If you're not getting a response, you can then, so leave the coil where it is, but the winding on the side there.
Oh, here.
Yeah.
Turn it down.
Turn it up a little bit.
Up.
Yeah. Other way.
Turning up.
Keep going up. Okay, so we'll try about there. And we'll see if my finger moves again. So we're getting a bit of a response there. So you see that number there, it says 152 that's highlighted in green. We want that number there to be up around 700 to 1,500. Yeah. So we make that go up by either locating the that particular muscle in the motor cortex by moving the coil around slightly, or we can turn the coil up a little bit more as well. But if we turn the coil up, it means that we're not quite being as accurate. In terms of being able to find certain structures in the brain, that it kind of comes with practice when you learn the anatomy of the brain.
So yeah, move.
Okay.
Shall I try again?
Yeah. Okay. So that was down the side of my head there. So my jaw twitched slightly. So if you bring the coil up a little bit towards the center, that's it, and just swing the tail round back towards the back of my head slightly. Okay, that's good. Give that a go. Okay. So you see we've got a good one there. So 908. So that's really good. So we want to keep stimulating. Leave the coil where it is there,
Okay.
and keep stimulating. Okay, 317.
Oh, that's what we mean by 7 out of 10.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, so you want 7 out of 10 to be between 700 and 1,500, okay?
So if I don't get it, I try
So that
to
is-
move a bit, right?
That's it, yeah, yeah.
Oops.
Okay, that's okay. Keep going. Okay, so try and move the coil just back ever so slightly. That's it. Okay, 2, 2, 1. Yep. Okay, so that was in my little finger there. So keep going. That's good. So we're getting closer. Excellent. Oh, big response there. Okay. Another good one there. Okay, hold the coil there. Don't move the coil at all. So we've got 1 out of 10. Keep going. 2 out of 10. It's all right, we'll count that. There's 3. Okay, that one's underneath. So that we've done, keep going, so still 3 out of 10. 4 out of 10. 4 out of 10. 4 out of 10.
Oops.
You killed me. Okay, keep going. There's 5 out of 10. 5 out of 10. Keep going. And again. And again. Okay. So if we, for the sake of a demonstration,
Yep.
we'll call that 7 out of 10. So what you want to do there is, because you've got the right place, you want to turn the coil down, turn the intensity of the coil down. That's it. So keep coming down. And then try another one there. Now we should start to see much lower numbers. Okay, so you see we're at 248 there. Keep going. $151, that's good. So we've got that one there now. We're on 2 out of 4 tries. So keep going. So that's 2 out of 8 tries. Keep going. 3 out of 9. Keep going. 3 out of 10. 3 out of 11. 3 out of 12. 106. Okay, so that's another good run. So that's 4 out of 13. 5 out of 13. So do one more. Okay, so again, for the sake of a demonstration there, we can say that we'll call that 5 out of 10.
Okay.
Obviously, you want to be, when you've got an actual subject, you want to actually be making sure that you are doing the right numbers. But for the sake of the demonstration, we can say that, so for the sake of the demonstration, we can say that my resting motor threshold, disable there. We can say that my resting motor threshold was 55%. So what you want to do there is set RMT, and you can see we've set that at 55%. Is that, you understand that a bit
Yes,
more
yes.
clearer? Cool, okay. So next thing, you can then secure the coil back in there. Excellent, cool. And then when we go back to the patient list there, we can see there, so I was number 5 there, and you can see we've set my intensity at 55%. Now the next thing we can do, we can then select that patient there, and we can go into select our protocol, and we can then, depending on the type of research you're doing, or depending on what the literature in your area of research says, you can either design the same protocol if you want continuity. So if you're testing a hypothesis, you can design the same protocol that's in that literature, or you can come up with a slightly different protocol, which is going to try a new hypothesis. So you can then, so we can go into protocol setups there, and this is the screen here where you decide what your protocol is going to be. So you've got there, in a repetitive protocol, you've got your number of pulses, you've got the frequency of the pulses. So at the moment we've got 10 pulses at 20 hertz. We can stimulate a percentage of the motor threshold there. So my motor threshold is 55%, and we're going to stimulate at 80% of that. So if there's someone who's good at maths, can probably work that out, but I'm not very good at maths. So you've got your number of trains. So we've got a total of 3 trains, and you've got the inter-train interval. So that's the gap between each train. And you can change those by either doing your up or down arrows there. You can click in the box and get a drop-down menu there. Or if you press tab, it will highlight the box there, and you can type in the number you want. So say, for example, we want 9 pulses there, and then tab across. And again, you change the frequency there by, if we want, let's say we want 25. So I press 2 twice there. But it's always, you always need to keep going because the decimal point stays in the middle. So if you wanted 20, let's say we want 22, we do 2200 would be 22. And again, 80%, we can tab across there. I've missed it. But number of trains there, if we want 2 trains, again, 2 in there, and our inter-train interval can have 0.6 or 0.69. There we are. Make sense?
If we are not planning, I mean, if our study is not planning to study motor cortex,
yeah.
say we're interested in the frontal one, so do we still use this method to test the threshold and then move to the frontal regions? Or is there another way to do it?
It depends on how the research has been set up in that field. So it depends on their kind of pre-stimulation protocols. If in the research they have tested their motor threshold and are stimulating the frontal cortex at a percentage of motor threshold, then yeah, you'd want to take motor threshold. But it all depends on previous literature. So you want to kind of replicate that as close as you can do. Yeah. So. And in those settings, you've also got, so you can set your simulation settings there. You've also got the display settings. So in the same screen there, we had stimulation on that side, we've got display there. We can then set how we want that screen to look. So the screen, when we're capturing those pulses, we can set up how the screen, how we want it to look. So you can, essentially here we're setting kind of the zoom, how far in and how far out of the traces we are. We've got a notch filter there. You want your notch filter left on because that's filtering out all the 50 hertz noise just from the plugs and everything. And then we can see there we've got a click, so we can put in a pre-stimulation alert. So that's going to be between pulses. If we've got a gap of, say, 20 seconds between each train of pulses, we can set a little alert that's going to come on to say, okay, then the next train is about to start. So that's everything in there. Is there any questions? Anything I've not covered in there that doesn't kind of make sense? Or is that? I hope it's all made sense. Yeah?
Would you recommend us to use a navigation system right now, testing that threshold you just did?
You can do. To test the motor threshold, probably not, because the motor threshold is, because it's a structure that's on the top of the brain, it's relatively easy to find. So using the navigation system would be quite a long-winded way of finding the motor threshold, because it's fairly, I mean, the motor threshold is the most tested thing in literature because, again, it's easy to find. If, for example, your previous research says we're stimulating somewhere different, so somewhere in the frontal lobe, if it's quite a deep brain structure, you might want to find it on the navigation software first, and then, and then stimulate using the coil and the navigation system there, which takes us quite nicely on, actually, we can go on to run back through the brain site, because, again, everything is kind of working together today, if you like. Yeah, so if there's no further questions on the TMS machine, we can run through brain site if you like. Wicked. Okay, I'll just unhook myself. Did you manage to get the MRI data rectified? Because it'd be nice to use that as an example. Oh, cool. Yeah, there's USB ports on the back of the Mac. Over there. I don't know if right click's been set up on the mouse. There we are. Okay, cool. Okay, no worries.
Just cancel.
Can't stop on there. All right, so that's the file we're using. Okay, so to start a new project there, like we say, I'll go straight back to the beginning. So you log on to the iMac. Brain site here is at the bottom there, that big B. The first screen you're presented with is this one here. So if we're going to use Alex's data there, we're going to new empty project, and then we get this screen here. What we're going to do is choose an anatomical data set. So we choose there, and we're on the desktop, T1, and then we want to open this. So fingers crossed. That looks as though it's a bit better. Okay, excellent. So we've got MRI data there. Now what we can do is, because that's a little bit dark, we can move that down, change the resolution a little bit. So the first step we want to do is find those two structures, so the anterior commissure and the posterior commissure, so then BrainSight knows kind of how big the brain is that we're working with. So to do that, we go into Atlas Spaces. I'll just come round so I'm not kind of blocking it for everyone there. So Atlas Spaces, in there, and then you can either, this is what I was talking about yesterday, you can either find coordinates in the step before, where you're kind of registering your MRI, and then you can enter them from a matrix, or what I tend to do is on the ACPC. So around the front of this knuckle here, we should have, if I scroll through, what we're looking for is that bridge. Okay, so if I was to zoom in there, where's Alt? You can see we've got that bridge just there between the two hemispheres. So you see that white flash that comes across there. So that's our anterior commissure. So right down the midline, you want to select that and then come down to the bottom there and select AC. And then towards the back here on this knuckle of the brain, we should have there our posterior commissure. So just scroll through slice by slice. And there we are, really nice and clear, posterior commissure. So again, the link between the two hemispheres towards the rear of the brain. So click on there, again, right down the midline of the brain, and set the posterior there. Okay. Next step now is to scale the brain down and make sure everything kind of fits quite nicely. So what we're going to do is if we click update in there, and the atlas, it's going to, so the average, we're scaling to kind of an average there. So the average there is the MNI, which is the Montreal Neurological Institute. So if we click update, we want this to roughly match the same size as the MNI there. So you can see, to double check that, we can turn that opacity down. And we can see at the moment, especially across the top and towards the back of the scalp there, we're a little bit too large. So to do that, just move your bounding box in slightly and then click update. You can see, so we've brought that in at the back ever so slightly, but I'd recommend bringing that in a little bit more. So if we click update there, and you can see it's moving the front as well. So this isn't a cropping tool, it's more of a scaling tool. So everything we do at the back is also mirrored at the front. So it kind of resizes everything to keep everything the same size. So again, I'd come in just a little bit more. So in terms of front to back, I'd say our overlay there is about spot on. But you can see at the top of the scalp there, we're just protruding a little bit more than we want to be really. So we want to bring that down ever so slightly, just to resize that. And again, click update. So again, we've still got a little bit of a protrusion there. So bring that down slightly again. Click update, and just turn that opacity down. So I'd still say this section here of the scalp is just a little bit too large. So I would bring that down ever so slightly. Okay, much better. So that looks as though there. You see we're following the trace of the outline of an average brain there. And I would recommend that isn't far off, maybe ever so slightly more. Okay, spot on. Cool. So we've got a nice gap there surrounding the brain, which is where our CSF fluid, obviously that encompasses the brain, is sat. So once that's done, click finish. That's that sorted. So the overlays section, what this allows us to do is if in the fMRI you've done a functional task, so be it a visual task or a motor task, what you can then do is you can bring in that scan there and you can lay it over that MRI scan. So you'd find a hotspot in the MRI scanner by having them do, if it's like a blink test or if they're reacting to a visual stimulation. You bring that in. What I'll do for this one is I'll use an overlay that's already on the laptop. So we're going to configure overlays, and if we add there, we go into sample data. So we've got Brodmann there, which is an overlay that we can use. Now what we want to do is, you can see at the moment that overlay again is just kind of off slightly. So we can move that overlay there. If you take the registration there and set that to Atlas space, because that's the same way we've registered this MRI, is using those two structures inside the brain. And there we are. We've got our fMRI is now lying over our MRI, and we've got highlighted certain areas of the brain. So again, you can change the threshold there and that's going to highlight or take away those structures in the brain. So because I know the motor cortex quite well, we can keep talking about the motor cortex. But obviously, that's going to change depending on the research that you're doing. So I'll take that down. The motor cortex is number 4. Okay. So once that's sorted, you can then close that. So that's our fMRI data now is sorted. Next thing to do could be a region of interest. So this is, if you want to identify a certain structure in the brain, you can go into region of interest, and you can then, we'll turn that threshold down. So that there, at the moment, that's going to find everything that is inside that purple box. So you want to turn that threshold down slightly, he says. So we just want kind of the brain structure there. Okay. So if we then use this tool here, so where my mouse is there, there's a seed tool. So we can plant a seed there in the brain. Now, again, I'm going to play around with that. Bear with me. So I'll just clear that there. So we want to change our threshold until we've just got okay, so you can see there we've just got the cortex now, which is nice. Now the next thing we do, so you can then pick up, if it's missed any parts of the brain, you can then pick those up. So that's using the seed. You can also use the pen there. So if there is just kind of one structure in the brain that you want to outline, you can essentially draw around it with the pen. So say we've taken a brain structure there that we're going to use, and you can then fill that using, sorry, it's that tool there. You can then fill that there, and you can then take that back through. So if we go through to the next slice, it's going to have, so it's taken all those for us, and again, we can find that structure there. So it can be time consuming, but it does mean then your accuracy can be absolutely, your accuracy can be really good there. So again, we can do there. And what we can do there now is we can plant a seed in that structure there. So in the next slice, it's not done it. In the next slice, again, we draw around that structure. And we want to fill that. So let's say, for example, we've located the structures in the brain that we want to work with. So at the moment, we're taking a slice right through the center of the brain. We can then come out of there, and the next thing to set up is our reconstructions. So first one we can do is a skin reconstruction. So we can see what our participant looked like. Again, so when we're doing MRI, when we're doing the brain scanning, we don't need to concern ourselves with anything under the nose, really, because there's no brain tissue located under there. So you can move that bounding box there, and you can run it up and take away, we don't need any of this detail here. Again, we can kind of resize slightly. We can just take that in. Now what we can do there is we can compute skin, and this should give us, okay. So we've got an artifact on the skin there. Was that an electrode or something, do we know? Just got a skin artifact there. Okay, no worries. But there, so we've got a reconstruction of the skin there, and we can have that kind of smooth slightly.
Glasses?
Could be. We can also change that skin we can also change that skin air threshold slightly. What's he doing? Okay, so that there is it's quite ghoulish. So what we've done there is that we've told BrainSight that there's more air than skin there. So if we turn that down slightly, again, compute the skin, we should be back to a more normal looking subject. Okay, there we go. So then we can use that. So when later on in the next step, when we're using the skin image to track the coil, that is the reconstruction you want to do to have the coil move across the top of the skin there. So once the skin's done, you can close that. You can also do a full brain curvilinear. So what this will do is, again, using that MRI detail there, we can move the box up, because again, we don't need anything kind of underneath the nose. Compute curvilinear there. And this should give us, there we are. So the outline of the brain with kind of brain structures on top there. So we've got a full model of the brain, got the underside of it there, right the way around. We can also close that. Now that region of interest that we made earlier, so when we're using the orange tool and going through those slices in the brain, we can then we can make a surface out of that region of interest. So if we go to ROI, you can see there we've got the orange that we did earlier. So again, compute curvilinear. Bear with me. I don't think we've done enough in the previous step. Okay, it's not going to let me do that because we've not done enough orange in the previous step for it to have enough detail to make a curvilinear. But the more detail, like I say, the more detail you put into that ROI, it then means that that surface there is going to be easier to find. But for the sake of a demonstration, it's not something that is necessarily needs to be done. Cool. So we can go back up to there and discard that. Okay. Next thing to do is to set those landmarks that we did yesterday. So again, we've got our MRI there, a skin reconstruction. Now this is the part where you want to be as accurate as possible with the cursor. So that is, and again, we're setting those, you want them to be in a static place in the head and somewhere that's unambiguous. So it's someone, so by unambiguous I mean every subject has the same landmarks at the same place in their head. So again, we always use kind of the bridge of the nose and that little notch above the tragus in the ears there. And you can also use the tip of the nose as well, because then that gives BrainSight a bit of depth, because those three are often on the same plane there. But using the tip of the nose also gives BrainSight a bit of information on those two planes as well. So if we move our cursor to the right place there, so we've got the Nasian, so right in the tip of the nose, and you can see on this side, I'm not quite central. So if we bring that across ever so slightly, and we come back ever so slightly as well. Okay, so if we turn our subject round, see, we've got the cursor right on the bridge of the nose there. So we record a new landmark, and we set that as the Nasian. Okay, so that's that one set. So again, we find our next one. So in the ear, we've got the tragus just here, and then this crease here in the back of the ear, we want to set another landmark there. But we can see on this side here, we want to move that in ever so slightly. Okay. So we've got a subject there. So we set that as our LPA. Someone's there. And we go the same on the other side. So the tragus there, and if we follow that dark shadow there, and we come onto the crease just above the tragus there, and again, on this side, we want to move that in ever so slightly. You can see, if we look at this, if we look at the MRI here, the crease I mean, if we zoom in ever so slightly there, that, the resolution's changed. So that crease is just coming in the ear there, where the ear canal is. So we want to be just there. So again, set that as our RPA. So that's a new landmark, and it's now our RPA. Okay. Another one to set, like I was saying earlier, just to give us a little bit of depth, is right on the tip of the nose. So find that one there. And again, so where we can zoom out. So central, got the cursor, so if we square you up slightly. Move that across just a little bit. Okay, and then come back. So we'll set that as well. You want to come back ever so slightly, I would suggest. So it is worth, on this one, it is worth taking your time and being nice and accurate, because this is going to determine how well the coil knows where it is in relation to the brain. So we'll set that there. That's a new landmark, and that is tip of the nose there. Okay, so that's those set. We can come out of this window here, and we can then go into targets. So this can be done, like we mentioned earlier, this can be done in either before you do your hunt for your kind of MEP, or it can be done afterwards. If you've done your MEP and you're then looking to stimulate targets in like your frontal lobe or your epiphyseal lobe or your parietal lobe, depends on, like I said, depends on previous research there. So configure those targets. So again, we've got our fMRI data is lying over our MRI data there. Now what we can do there is, if we are creating targets based on that, we can then find, so we've got there our kind of motor hotspot there, so we can then determine targets within the motor hotspot. If we want to set targets using kind of the anatomy of the brain, so if you already know the structure in the brain that you want to target, you can go to the inspector and you can turn off that fMRI data there. You can see now we're just left with MRI. You can also use the coordinates there. So again, if you know the coordinates within the brain of the structure that you want to stimulate, you can type the coordinates into there and you can say, okay, this is where it is in the brain. So coordinates is the most accurate one to do because you know precisely where it is. But again, we'll stick with the motor cortex because I know where it is. So we find you up here. So again, and you can see on the brain there, if we turn that round, we want to be kind of further back. So we've got our motor strip running down there. So you can see there, we've got our TMS coil there, and at the moment, that is sat on the surface of the brain itself. So what you can do is you can change that view there, and you can have that as the skin. So we know on the head where we're going to be doing as well. But you can see that cursor's disappeared and is now, because the cursor, the point of the cursor is currently sat on the cortex. So you can move that out by changing the crosshairs offset with this slider there. So you can see we can come out there. So that's our target set. The dotted line, the target is set in the cortex, but the solid line there is where the same place is on the head there. So there we are there. So again, we want to move that back in because we're no longer on the scalp. So you always want to be able to see whatever your crosshairs are, so we're using a mini TMS coil down here, you always want to be able to see the cursor on the location of the target that you want to stimulate. So if we move that there, we can then change, using these sliders here, we can then change the trajectory of that coil. So we've got anterior and posterior there. We can also change it laterally, so we can have it swing across the top of the head. And we can also change the twist. So when we were finding my MEP, I said the swing of the coil is quite important. So we can dictate which direction we want to stimulate the coil in. So I'll just come round. Okay, we'll stand you up nice and pretty. Okay, so we can see there we don't have the coil quite flat on the head. Now what you want to do is you want to work at a tangent to these two here. So if we just swing that round slightly, you can see there we are nice and flat to our cursor line. And again, anterior and posterior, we want to be nice and flat. So I would say about there. Looks perfect. Okay, so we can set that as a new marker there. We've got marker 1. So you see we've got that red box there. So that's just the location on the scalp where we want to stimulate. But what we can also do is we can set that as a trajectory. So we can also have the angle dictated of the coil exactly where we want it. So to do that, you go down here, and we've got kind down where the cursor is, and we can have that as a trajectory. And we can now see in the same place, we've got a red coil. So that is showing the angle at which the pulse is going to enter the scalp and go to the cortex. So for example, we've got that set up there. What we do is we come out of this, and in terms of target setting, then that's all we need to know with target setting. And then the next step is sessions. So we can then go into a new online session, and we can see we've got that sample that we just made there, the target. So we bring that across, and we go into add, because that's what we want to find in this session there. And then we go into the next step. So what we want to do is we want to tell it that have a look at the way you've got everything set up, and you want to turn on the ports of everything that you're using. So the stimulator, which is going to be firing the coil, we've got the stimulator plugged in on the back here to trigger in 1. So just make sure that we've got trigger in 1 clicked there, so that the brain sight knows when the coil fires. We've also got the foot switch turned on there, and the foot switch is going into switch 1. So again, you want to make sure that that's clicked there. So once you've got those sorted, you want to go into Polaris, which is going to set the camera up. So if I'm the subject, we can have someone navigate the coil again, and we can have someone navigate the pointer if they like. So I'll put the tracker on there. So if someone wants to come up, I'll hand control over if anyone wants to drive it. Someone? Or we can have a subject where the subject tracker, and I can be the pointer. Very enthusiastic. Great, cool. Okay. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that the camera here has a range of about 1.5 meters. So you want to make sure you've got your subject within that kind of range there. And you also want to make sure the reflective spheres on your subject tracker and your pointer and your coil are always pointing towards the camera. So a nice headband for you there, sir. There you are, so you want that. Oh, right. If you could you just pop your hand on there just to hold that still? That's it. Okay, so I'll bring that down just onto the forehead there. That's it. That's good. Okay. So if we just get an Allen key, you can see, you just want to, so we can see we've got the subject is pointed there, but if we move these ever so slightly, just move the orientation of those dots. Oh. Okay. So what we can actually do, it disappeared. So if you pop your head back slightly for me. Okay. So you want that to try and be as central as you can with your subject in this field of vision here. And then what I'm going to do is take the pointer there. Now we're going to register on our subject here where those landmarks are. So BrainSight knows where the subject is in relation to the landmarks that we've already set on. We're going to pretend it's his MRI data as well there. So using the foot switch there, we can take the pointer in, and you can see now that the pointer is also moving around the subject there. So what we're going to do, again, making sure everything is being able to be seen, the next step to go into is registration. So we heard there that the Mac asked me to point to the Nazian there. So that tip there on the bridge of the nose, we're going to find this on our subject. Again, making sure that BrainSight can see where everything is. And you'll be able to see, if we look in the bottom corner down here, you can see subject tracker's green, but the point is currently red. That's because the camera can't see it. When I bring that in, he says, there we are. Because the camera can now see those dots, it knows where everything is. So using the foot switch, we point to the Nazian, and you want it touching the skin, but you don't want it to be hard. Oh. Okay.
LPA.
So LPA, we go around to the, I'll just pop this foot switch around there. So we go around to the left of the subject. So you want to, again, find that crease just above the tragus in the ear.
RPA.
Bring that back around. Normally you wouldn't have to move the switch around in a lab setting because you'd have everything nicely set up.
Tip of nose.
Okay, so that's everything sampled there. And the next thing to do is just to validate those points there. So when we take the pointer now, we should see the cursor move across the screen when the camera knows where the pointer is. So you can see, there we are. So we're on the top of the scalp there. So we've got quite thick hair, full of product as well, which is excellent. So you can see there, as we move across the head, the pointer's moving as well. So you're going to have to redo your hair, I do apologise. the best thing to have it is just like this. Just shave it all off. It's the easiest thing. So you can see, as we're moving around, the pointer is moving across the face and around the back of the head. Again, try and make sure that the camera can see those dots all the time. Now what we want to do is we want to have the crosshairs to skin distance on the four kind of poles of the 4 poles of the head. You want that crosshairs to skin distance to be, you want that number to be green, which is like 1 to 5 millimeters. You can record a new landmark, because obviously the curvature of the head with everyone is slightly different. So if we've got a subject with a particularly round head, it might be quite wide. So we can then record new landmarks at the side of the head there. But because we're green there, there's no real need to do that. And again, on the top of the brain, on the top of the head, again, it's green there, so there's no real reason to record new landmarks. So the next thing to do is to go through to the perform window. Now you can see there, again, we can turn the fMRI data off by going into the inspector, which is this blue one here. Click in there, and then we can just uncheck you. Thank you very much. So we've got rid of our MRI data there, fMRI data, sorry. We'll close that. And you can see we've got our marker on the scalp, we've got our crosshairs there, we've got the brain there, and we can change these views. I mean, change those views depending on what you want to see. There's no set views to have, you know, so you can see, for example, on here, we could have perpendicular in samples, and because the coil isn't under the camera at the moment, it obviously can't see where we are. So I'll pop the pointer down. Now, I'm not actually going to administer TMS on you, so I'm not going to zap you in the brain, don't worry. So we've got our coil there. As we bring this in, you want to make sure as well you change the driver. So at the moment, the camera is still looking for the pointer that I've put over there. So you want to change that by coming down here to driver, and you now want to have BF70, which is the coil in my hand. So now as I introduce the coil into the camera's field of vision, we're going to see the cursor start to move around. And again, if we try and orientate the silver dots towards the camera, you can see there that we're on the scalp there. So as this moves around the scalp, it's driving the cursor, it's driving the pointer. Now in a lab setting, you wouldn't have this kind of right in front of your subject. The person holding the coil can be using brain sight. We don't have to have, in your lab environment, you don't have to have your subject there as well, because obviously the leads for the coils are only this long. So for the instance of a demonstration, we can't get everything to line up just right. But normally when you're administering TMS, you can be sat behind your subject, and you've got a lot more, you've got a lot more leeway there. So what I'm going to do, I'll turn the stimulator on, but I'm going to put it all the way down to 1%. So it's not even, so 1%, I mean, you can't feel anything at 1%. So what we can do is we can be on the scalp there, and then every time we press the red button, BrainSight is going to record where the coil is on the head when we press the button. So we can see, 1, 0 there. Come on, give me 2%, okay. Make sure, obviously, that your stimulator is on enable. Every time I press the red button, so we've got the coil on the head there. Okay, so I stimulated you on the head there, and we've now got the orientation of where the coil was. So again, we can get as close as we want there. We move around the head, so you've got quite thick hair, so it's not sitting where it should do, obviously. As you move around the head, we've got that red dot. I won't try and line them up because I was there for a long time yesterday trying to do it. But again, so we record our samples as we move around the head. And then we can then, once we've administered our TMS session there, we pop our coil back in. That's our subject sorted. Well done. Thank you very much. Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
For the straw, can it show, like, for example, when there is some kind of picture that shows to the client, and then can we observe whether or not there is some changes in the proportion of the brain that is like of another color due to some of the external stimuli?
I think for that, you would need to be monitoring the EMG of the subject. So if, for example, we're in the motor cortex again, we can stimulate above the motor cortex, and we're getting a twitch every time we stimulate, and we can then import the EMG data into BrainSight, so we can say it can measure changes in brain activity every time we stimulate. If was that the question you meant there?
So it means that it can, right?
So you can import EMG data, so you can look at changes in brain activity when you stimulated. Yes.
The EMG data is actually not included in this tool, or is it actually?
So the EMG data is on the stimulator itself. It's not in the BrainSight. You can have EMG in the BrainSight, but the kind of setup that the university's bought, the EMG is on the stimulator instead. If that makes sense. Cool. So we can go out of there. We can go back to this here, and in session there, we can then review the session that we've just done. So we go into review, and you can see we've got all our samples fired there. We've got the area of the brain that we were trying to stimulate, and you can see we can then set new landmarks and new targets based on maybe the function of the brain has changed slightly, so we can then set new landmarks and new targets. So that essentially covers everything with how BrainSight works and how the stimulator kind of drives BrainSight. Is there anything I've not covered that you'd like to ask?
As you mentioned, there's an artifact in the skin reconstruction. So
Yeah.
is there any way to do away with it, or does it matter?
As long as it's not interfering when you're doing the registration, as long as the skin artifact isn't interfering there, then I don't think there's anything to worry about. It could be worthwhile in the previous step. I mean, the skin artifact could be there. It could have been something in the MRI. So if we've got kind of foam pads keeping the subject's head still, it could have been the end of a foam pad or something like that. So if it's something like that, it's nothing to worry about. So, any other questions? Is it relatively simple? I mean, you're welcome to kind of have a bit of a play around with it there as well. Obviously, we ran through how the BrainSight chair works yesterday. So instead of you trying to keep yourself still, the nice thing with the BrainSight chair is that it keeps the subject, they can just relax, and everything's going to be nice and still. There's no need for any kind of human error to be brought in there as well. So. Okay, cool. Thank you very much. I'm glad we managed to get that sorted from yesterday as well. So it was worth the late night.